Let me begin by saying that I've always believed that the Mutual Defense Treaty is obsolete. The Cold War framework by which we entered into the Mutual Defense Treaty has ceased to exist. Today, the priority of countries is economic progress. They want food in the table of their countrymen, especially here in the Philippines. And today, while we used to view the Soviet Union and China as a threat because of ideological differences with the Americans, we now view particularly China and Russia as very important economic partners. And of course, trade as well as investments from China and Russia are very much welcome because our priority now is to uplift the living standard of all Filipinos. So it is in this context that we have to re-examine whether or not we still need the priority now of everyone, including China and Russia, is to bring food to the table of all their citizens. No? And that is why I think the Mutual Defense Treaty, because the conditions by which we adopted the Mutual Defense Treaty are no longer in existence, should also be re-examined in this regard. Now, having said that, the Mutual Defense Treaty has also proven to be inutile because twice we have lost islands and the United States did not come to our rescue. We lost Mischief Reef, we lost Panatag Shoal. And yet, despite the fact that it is very clearly stated that when there is an armed attack on any of our territories, the US should come to our assistance, the United States failed to do so. So if the Mutual Defense Treaty has proven inutile in protecting the integrity of our territory, what is the point of the Mutual Defense Treaty? Another point that some commentators have said is that although the Mutual Defense Treaty allegedly says that the US will come to our assistance whenever we are under armed attack, still under US domestic law, they will have to comply with the constitutional requirement that Congress must in fact concur in the declaration of war before the United States can come to our assistance. To me, that's not too important a point because, as you know, the US has gone to war with or without US congressional approval. There is a relationship now of mutual interdependence between the United States and China. They are the biggest investors and biggest creditors to one another. It will be foolish for US and the China to engage in a conflict now because they are too interdependent on one another. They're the biggest creditors and biggest investors in each state, and I don't think it is to their interest to actually engage in a shooting war with one another. Having said that, the reality is there is now a competition because the United States does not want to accept the reality that China has become an economic power and will, of course, have increased influence in the area. So there is a refusal, for whatever reason, for the United States to admit that they now have to deal with China because in the past, when China was not an economic giant that it is, they simply ignored China and proceeded like China did not exist. I think the Americans would have to come to terms that China is now a competitor as far as economic power is concerned, and they have to recognize her and deal with her as such. So what is now the implication of the visit of Vice President Harris here in Manila? From the point of view of the president, I think he was right in saying it's not a big deal. Because although there is a conflict in the West Philippine Sea, still Harris said that she will only visit Palawan, which without a doubt is not disputed as forming part of Philippine territory. But that's as far as the Philippine perception is concerned. The American perception is it is in fact important to send a message to China that the Philippines is still an ally and that the Americans are still the force to reckon with in the Asia Pacific area. Take note, I said that this is the American perception because the president's perception that the trip is no big deal is valid as far as the Philippines is concerned because we are both friends to the US and China. And of course, the vice president's boarding a Philippine vessel to cruise along the waters of undoubtedly Philippine water should not mean any harm to any other country. But the Americans are wily. They know that despite this, they will still be sending a message to China that the Philippines remains a committed ally and that the Philippines, without a doubt, is on the side of the Americans in case of a shooting war with China. That is the American perception. Now, because of this American perception, the Chinese too have their perception, and you cannot blame China in thinking that the American perception, in fact, is the correct perception, and therefore the visit may constitute a threat to China. That is the Chinese perception because the conflict is between America and China. Going back now to the EDCA, why do I think we should scrap EDCA? Number one, it violates the Constitution. It allows the prepositioning of equipment and military troops without a treaty required by the Philippine Constitution, duly concurred in by the Senate, duly recognized by the other party as a treaty, and where Senate requires it, submitted to a referendum to be approved by the people. Secondly, it is not pursuant to our interests. When we allow U.S. preposition equipment and troops in our country, which could be used in an aggressive war or confrontation with China, we allow our territory to be used in a manner injurious to another state, that is China. That makes the Philippines a legitimate target for military attack on the part of China as well. Unless it is our national interest to engage in war with China just because the Americans want to ensure the hegemony in the area, there is no utility to have the EDCA beyond 2023. Now, the reality is, if the president will scrap EDCA, if the president will scrap MDT, the president already has had personal knowledge of what the United States can do. They were spirited away from the Philippines in 1986 under the pretense that they were going to be brought to Ilocos. The Americans can remove the president if he will move to remove EDCA and the Mutual Defense Treaty at the same time. So my humble suggestion is to ensure that the Americans will not view the president as antagonistic to American interests. For now, let us keep the Mutual Defense Treaty. I think the Americans will accept if we were to terminate EDCA but retain MDT. Retaining MDT is only for the purpose of ensuring they do not topple President PBBM, which is what happened in 1986.